Hey there, welcome. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at 20 advanced words and phrases on the topic of health and happiness. So the first word we're going to learn is this adjective, sedentary. Sedentary. So involving little exercise or physical activity, and we usually use it to describe activities that involve sitting down, a bit like this person watching a movie below me, drinking beer, eating crisps, and they've got their popcorn ready as well. Now, the pronunciation is sedentary. Sedentary. Okay. Increased work pressure is leading more people to lead a sedentary lifestyle as people spend longer hours at work. So we can use collocations like sedentary lifestyle, sedentary life, sedentary job, and you might get asked a question in the IELTS speaking test like this. Why do you think more and more people are living a sedentary lifestyle? Okay, so you could get this in part 3 of the speaking test. You could also get this in task 2 of the writing test. Here's how I would answer. Well, I guess more and more of our work and leisure activities involve sitting still. For example, in the past, many people had jobs that involved traveling or working with their bodies or hands. Nowadays, it's increasingly common to work with a computer. Similarly, in the past, we may have traveled to meet up with friends or done sport for fun. Nowadays, a lot of our leisure activities involve screen time, like playing with our smartphones or computer consoles. Okay, I want to point out some of the vocabulary that I used in this answer. I started with, well, I guess. So I guess is like I think. It's a useful synonym of in my opinion, or I think, or I would say. We can say I guess. We often in IELTS, especially in the speaking test, have to do this. We talk about the past and then compare it to the present. So I use this kind of sentence structure like in the past, da-da-da-da, nowadays, da-da-da-da. So you can practice that. And you'll get asked a lot of questions about, is this the same as it was in the past? Did you do the same thing in the past? And you can use this sentence structure. In the past, da-da-da-da, nowadays, da-da-da-da. Okay, the next word, one question to practice this vocabulary. What are some problems with living a sedentary lifestyle? So you can pause the video and answer this, or just answer it in your own time. And I'll also have a PDF for this lesson, so you can look at that, download that PDF, and practice some of these questions to help you remember and learn and use the vocabulary in this lesson. Okay, the next word is health conscious. So it's an adjective that means concerned about how healthy one's diet and lifestyle are. So you can see this lady below me is very health conscious. She's drinking a lot of water, she's in sports clothes, so presumably she does a lot of sport, and she's also got a lot of fruit around her. Now the pronunciation is health conscious. Health conscious. Try and say it after me. Health conscious. So conscious, we've got the first syllable has the stress. Conscious. Conscious. Health conscious. People often become increasingly health conscious as they grow older. Try and say that after me. People often become increasingly health conscious as they grow older. All right. So we said increasingly health conscious. That's a collocation. We could say extremely health conscious, particularly health conscious, or even some people are overly health conscious, which means maybe it's not even healthy how health conscious they are. Here's a question you might get in the speaking test. Do you consider yourself to be very health conscious? So a typical part 1 question. You know, I do actually. I try to eat a balanced diet and I do a lot of sports. I go rock climbing at least 3 times a week, and I try to go on big walks as regularly as possible. Well, usually 2 or 3 times a week. I also don't drink a huge amount of alcohol, so that's also good for my health. I'd also say that I sleep a good amount and I take multivitamins, so yeah, all in all, I'd say that I'm a pretty health conscious. All right. So we've got some useful vocabulary here. We've got words like balanced diet. If you've got a balanced diet, it means that you eat fruit, you eat vegetables, you eat carbohydrates, you eat protein, all in moderation. You balance your diet. You don't just eat sweets or just eat meat. You balance your diet. You've got a varied diet. I also want to point out this phrase, I also don't drink a huge amount of alcohol. Now that's very typical in English. Instead of saying I don't drink much alcohol or I drink only a little bit of alcohol, we say something like I don't drink a huge amount of alcohol, which sounds kind of strange, but it's actually very common. Like I don't spend a huge amount of my time playing sports, which means I spend very little time playing sports. So these kind of phrases like I don't drink a huge amount of alcohol means I drink very little alcohol, but it's a very common way to say it. I've also got this phrase here, so yeah. Now that's just a colloquial kind of expression, things that we say when we're speaking and we just want to summarize our ideas. So I say, so yeah, all in all, which means in conclusion. It's to say like on balance or at the end of the day, and it's the way that we would conclude what we're saying. So all in all, I'd say that I'm pretty health conscious. Here's a question to practice. What can the government do to encourage people to be more health conscious? The question, what can the government do? That's very typical in IELTS, and it's kind of annoying because you're not part of the government, but for some reason IELTS examiners love this type of question. What can the government do to encourage people to be more health conscious? What can the government do to encourage more people to recycle household waste? So what can the government do to is a very typical IELTS question. The next word is overworked, an adjective that describes the lady just below me. She's overworked. It's when you have too much work. I'm sure one or two of you watching this lesson are feeling overworked, maybe because you've got so much IELTS preparation to do. Pronunciation, overworked, overworked. Yeah, overworked. Interns often feel overworked and under-respected. Repeat after me. Interns often feel overworked and under-respected. Okay, so feel overworked. It's a very common collocation. Now we also have a verb form and we have a noun form. So overwork the verb and overwork the noun. And I've put some example sentences so you can learn how to use this vocabulary better. Okay. What have we got next? Do you feel overworked? So again, typical part one question. No, in general, I don't feel overworked. I'd say that I work quite a lot, including at the weekends and most evenings. However, because I work for myself, I can also take time off or finish work early if I begin to feel burnt out. I've always got deadlines to meet for my work, but to be honest, because they're self-imposed, I also give myself quite a lot of slack and don't get too uptight about finishing all of the tasks that I give myself. Okay, let me show you some of the vocabulary I've used. Work for myself. So I run a website, EnglishProTips.com. You'll know that by now. So I work for myself. I'm my own boss. I'm self-employed. So work for myself. I can also take time off. So take time off away from work or go on holiday or just take a morning off. So take time off means to break from the usual work routine. And I do this to avoid feeling burnt out. So this is a phrasal verb, an idiomatic phrasal verb that means to be exhausted, to be overwhelmed by the amount of work that you've got to do, and particularly when you can't cope anymore, you feel burnt out. So I give myself good breaks whenever I start to feel burnt out with the amount of work that I've got. Okay, I also mentioned deadlines to meet. So meet a deadline, that's a very common collocation. And this is the kind of thing that IELTS examiners are looking out for. I've also got this one, self-imposed. So if I've got a self-imposed task, that means I give myself that task. If I've got a self-imposed deadline, it means I give myself that deadline. So self-imposed. And I've got this very nice idiomatic phrase, give myself quite a lot of slack. So to give slack means, how would I describe it? It means to give some, you're not strict on somebody, you're giving them slack. You're saying, please do this, but it's not so important. You give them slack. So when I'm working for myself, I try to get all my deadlines finished, but if I don't, no big deal. I'm going to give myself some slack. I say it's not so important to meet that deadline. Okay, I've also got this phrase uptight. So uptight is like a synonym for strict and rigid. So I don't get too uptight. I don't get too strict with myself or worried that I haven't finished all the tasks that I give myself. Here's a question you can practice. Do you think that people in your country are generally overworked? A typical part 3 question. The next word is fatigue, a bit like this poor guy below me. It describes extreme tiredness. Pronunciation, fatigue. Fatigue. So stress on the teague. Fatigue. Many students suffer from fatigue as the result of stress in the run-up to exams. So that means when the students are getting ready for the exams, just before those exams, they start to suffer from fatigue because of stress. So they get stressed and they start to feel very tired. I remember I went through that sensation when I was finishing my university exams. So we can talk about suffering from fatigue or battling fatigue. We can also talk about different types of fatigue, like physical fatigue is when your body is exhausted, or mental fatigue when your mind is exhausted. And then we've got some nice adjectives as well, like extreme fatigue or severe fatigue. And then we can talk about the onset of fatigue, which is when it's just beginning. So you can say, I always try and recognize the onset of fatigue. So when fatigue is starting to arrive in my body, I try to recognize this, the onset of fatigue. So what can people do to avoid fatigue? Well, I guess the most important thing is to make sure you're sleeping enough. If you're working or studying a lot and not getting enough sleep, well, that's basically a recipe for disaster. There are countless studies that emphasize how essential it is to sleep for 7 or 8 hours per night, so I wouldn't underestimate the importance of getting enough rest. Okay, I really like this phrase, a recipe for disaster. So a very good idiom that we can use in the IELTS exam. If something is a recipe for disaster, it means it's going to end in problems. For example, if you're an IELTS student and you've got the exam in 1 week, and you're not studying at all, that is a recipe for disaster. It's going to end in problems. Or if your best friend tells you a very important secret and then you tell everybody you know, that's a recipe for disaster. Your best friend is going to find out and you're going to have problems. I've also got this, countless studies, which means many, many, many studies, and we could use that phrase in the speaking test, but also the writing test as well. Countless studies. Okay, what can people do to avoid fatigue related to work and family stress? So a part 3 question you could get in your IELTS exam. The next word is obesity. So being fat in a way that is dangerous for health. Pronunciation, obesity. Obesity. So the stress is on the B, obesity. Obesity is on the rise in many developed nations due to the abundance of unhealthy food options and lack of exercise. So we've got obesity, which is a noun, an uncountable noun, but we've also got the adjective form, obese. Obese adults will find it more difficult to get in shape. Now, get in shape is a very useful phrase that we're going to come across later in this lesson. Now, is obesity common in your country? So you could get asked this in part 3. You could get part 1 maybe as well, but most likely in part 3. Here's how I would answer. Yes, I'd say that it is. To be honest, I have no idea about the statistics, but it's certainly mentioned as a problem area in the UK. I'll often hear news on the radio talking about the problems with obesity in relation to the public health service or when discussing school lunches. Okay, now I want to show you this answer, particularly because I want to show you what you can do when you don't really know the answer. Look at this phrase. To be honest, I have no idea about the statistics, but... Okay, very useful for the speaking test. In the IELTS test, you're constantly asked questions that you don't really know the answer to, like, is obesity a common problem in your country? So you can say, well, to be honest, I have no idea about the statistics, but... And then you just give what you do know. So in this case, I just talk about how I hear about obesity on the radio and also in the news. All right. Why do you think obesity is a more common problem in some countries than others? Kind of interesting philosophical question for you there. Next one is work-life balance, which can be a countable or uncountable noun, and it describes the amount of time you spend doing your job compared with the amount of time you spend doing things you enjoy. So this is a topic that people talk about a lot more now compared to the past. It's a hot topic. Pronunciation: work-life balance. Work-life balance. Smart employers know that workers who have a good work-life balance are more dependable, loyal, and productive. That's true. What can people do to improve their work-life balance? Okay. Well, most people who complain about their work-life balance are in stressful and demanding jobs. I guess many of these people might want to consider a different job or possibly even a different career. However, I feel a bit insensitive saying that. It's not like people can simply switch jobs or switch their careers easily. They might have spent a long time training to be in a certain career or have people that depend on them to work hard and make money. Okay, so first, stressful and demanding job, a very useful collocation for the IELTS test. So stressful and demanding job. So a stressful job is obviously a job that causes you a lot of stress, and a demanding job is a job that makes lots of demands on you, like when you have a boss that's saying, by Friday at 2 o'clock you need to hand in the presentation, by Wednesday at 6 o'clock you need to have finished this report. So if you've got a demanding job, it's typically when your job requires a lot of effort, and often a lot of effort in a short period of time. Got this phrase, might want to consider. So this is an example of hedging. I'm not saying many people should get a different job. I'm hedging that, and so I'm saying in more general terms, might want to consider. So this kind of phrase would really show that you're in that kind of band 8, band 9 category for IELTS speaking. If you want to learn more about hedging, then I've got a video all about hedging, so you can learn how to use this technique. And it's certainly very useful for the speaking test, but also for the writing test. But anyway, we'll leave that for now. I feel a bit insensitive saying that, so you can always reflect on what you've already said and then elaborate. So that's what I do. I say my answer and I go, wait a second, I feel a bit insensitive saying that. And then I describe why I feel insensitive saying that. So I talk about how people might have trained in a certain job or have other people, like children or a spouse, that depend on them. So a very useful phrase here. Children depend on their parents. Describe someone you think has a good work-life balance. So this is a part 2 question from the IELTS test, and you'd be expected to speak on this topic for 2 minutes. So you'd want to describe who they are, how you know them, and why you think they've got such a good work-life balance. Right. Here's a part 3 question. Nowadays, more and more people are looking for work that provides a good work-life balance rather than the highest paid job. Is that a good thing? So I've actually asked this question in practice tests with some of my students in the past. And it's a very good question for IELTS examiners to ask, because it really reveals how good somebody's English is. So if you're preparing for your IELTS test, just take a second, just pause the video now and just see how you would answer this question. It's all about regular practice for the IELTS test. In fact, or you could just take a photo of this question, and then next time you're meeting up with your teacher or speaking partner, you could practice this question together. The next word is well-being. So it's also spelled well-being without the hyphen, so just one word. Now this is the state of feeling healthy and happy. Pronunciation, well-being. Well-being. So being, we've got the stress on the first syllable, being. Well-being. Overwork can have a negative effect on people's general well-being. Okay, there's lots of collocations like psychological well-being, spiritual well-being, physical well-being. And here's some more. Feeling of well-being, a sense of well-being. An IELTS examiner will be very impressed if you talk about your sense of well-being. Now, what can people do to improve their spiritual well-being? Okay, typical part 3 question. Here's how I would answer. I really wouldn't know. I certainly don't feel like the right person to ask. However, I guess some of the common ways that people improve their spiritual well-being are to do activities such as taking long walks, meditating, connecting with friends and families, helping others, having deep conversations about the meaning of life, those kinds of things. Possibly yoga as well. Okay, so remember, in the IELTS test, it's fine to say, I really wouldn't know, or I really don't know. The important thing is that you have a go anyway, so I really wouldn't know, but here's what I know, or here's as much as I know. Let me have a go answering this question. We can also use this more advanced phrase, I certainly don't feel like the right person to ask, or I'm not really sure I'm the right person to ask. This is like a good way of introducing your answer if you're not really sure on what your position is, or you've never really considered it before. I certainly don't feel like the right person to ask. But then I have a go at answering this question anyway. That's the important thing. And then I've got this nice collocation, deep conversations. So deep conversations are when you talk to your friend or your partner or even a stranger about philosophy or about feelings or relationships. Conversations that aren't surface level, like, nice weather today, but go really into the deep of our psyche. What can employers do to improve the well-being of their staff? This question comes up all the time, so practice it before your speaking test. Next word is livelihood. So the livelihood of this person below is that they're a fisherman. So maybe you can guess the definition of livelihood. It describes the way someone earns the money they need for food, a place to live, clothing, that kind of thing. So livelihood. Advances in AI, so AI is artificial intelligence, advances in AI are a threat to the livelihood of many workers. So threaten livelihood. We can also say our livelihood depends on. So this man's livelihood depends on the ocean, or livelihood depends on having lots of fish in the ocean. Now, do you think that advances in AI, artificial intelligence, will destroy certain people's livelihood? Certainly. It happens all the time. Technology or machinery improves and suddenly there's not such a need for that job. You can already see it happening with factory workers, cashiers in supermarkets, even travel agents. All these jobs are gradually being replaced by technology. I just imagine that AI will speed up the process and result in a lot more job losses just because the technology is so advanced. So, certainly is my initial response to this question. If you've watched some of my other videos, you know that I'm a big fan of this REE method, which is when you give a short response to a question. So R is for response. Next, you elaborate. So you elaborate on your answer. In this case, I mentioned how technology improves and suddenly there's not such a need for a job. So that's the first E, RE. Respond, elaborate, and then the final E is example. And that's when you give examples to back up what you're saying. And I do that here. I give the example of factory workers and cashiers in supermarkets and even travel agents. So I give 3 examples. So REE, respond, elaborate, example. A great way to give a full developed answer. I've also got this, are gradually being replaced by. So that's the passive voice, which is considered advanced grammar. So this would help me to be getting a higher score for grammatical range and accuracy. Next, do you think the government should look out for the livelihood of the richest or poorest in society? I would genuinely really like to know what you think for this question. I would personally say the poorest in society, but yeah, I would love to hear what you think about this question. A balanced diet. So a balanced diet is a diet consisting of a variety of different types of food and providing adequate amounts of the nutrients necessary for good health. Balanced diet. So you see, it's not balanced diet, it's balanced diet. Do you see, it's like the D at the end of balanced almost goes away, it vanishes, and it just goes straight into the D of diet. So balanced diet, balanced diet. It's kind of interesting that. One of the most important things you can do for yourself is to eat a balanced diet. Probably true. Now, is it important to have a balanced diet? Here's a part 1 question, and here's how I would answer. Yes, for sure. Actually, saying that, I've heard of a lot of diets where people don't eat any carbohydrates at all, or diets that only consist of eating meat. I'm no nutritionist, and those kind of diets might actually be better for our health, but I've personally always tried to have a balanced diet full of fish, vegetables, fruit, that kind of thing. Okay, so I want to show you something that I do in this answer. I say yes, for sure, and then I say, actually saying that, so that gives me an opportunity to give an answer and then reflect on whether I actually fully agree with what I've just said. So yes, for sure. Saying that, maybe not. Okay, I've also got this phrase carbohydrates. So that's, you get fat, protein and carbohydrates. So protein is in meat, fat is in things like avocados, also in meat as well. And then carbohydrates are things like rice or bread or pasta. Okay, how can the government encourage people to have a balanced diet? Again, it's that how can the government something? How can the government encourage people to have a balanced diet? How can the government encourage people to recycle more of their household waste? Next word is nutrition. So on this theme of food. So this describes the substances that you take into your body as food and the way that they influence your health. Pronunciation, nutrition. Nutrition. Good nutrition is important if patients are to make a quick recovery. So we can have good nutrition, we can have adequate or poor nutrition. These are all popular connotations. We have got a noun form, we've got an adjective form, and we've got another adjective form. So nutritional describes the food, and we've also got nutritious as well. Okay, so you can research that if you're not sure about the difference between nutritional and nutritious, but we're going to move on because we've got a lot of words to cover in this lesson. Now, do you think that schools have an ethical obligation to serve nutritious food? I wouldn't know if it's an ethical obligation. I certainly think it's a good thing if schools provide children with nutritionally rich food and a balanced diet. I just think the phrase ethical obligation might be a bit too rigid. Actually, you know what? I think they probably do. If schools don't have this obligation, they could serve children any old unhealthy food, and as children consume probably around half of their daily intake of food at school, it makes sense that it should be nutritious and healthy. Okay, now I want to point out something I do in this answer. I say, I don't think it's an ethical obligation. So I'm taking the word from the question. The question is, do you think schools have an ethical obligation? I go, I don't think they've got an ethical obligation. This is an advanced way that we can answer the questions, especially when the examiner uses like a subjective word, like, do you think that it's good? Or do you think it's important for people to spend a lot of time sleeping? You go, I don't think it's that important, or I don't think it's, if the examiner said, is it essential to recycle household waste? And you go, I'm not sure it's essential, but I think it's a good thing. So do you see that we echo that particular word and we emphasize it in our answer? Okay. I've got this, nutritionally rich food, a nice collocation that's going to boost my score for lexical resource. Balanced diet, another great collocation. And then I use this. Actually, you know what? I think they probably do. So this is an advanced way that we can actually reflect on something that we say and change our mind. And this is a really good thing because, as you may already know, in part 3 of the speaking test, you get a lot of questions that you've never really considered. And I think it's important to be able to answer it and then reflect on what you say and then change your mind, rather than like, I've said this, so now I need to defend my position until the bitter end. So you can use phrases like, actually, you know what, I think, and then you can change your opinion, that's fine. In fact, if anything, it's probably going to boost your score. I've also got this, any old unhealthy food, which means any unhealthy food, any old unhealthy food. So I'm not saying the food is old, it's just an idiomatic expression, any old unhealthy food. It's like if somebody loves board games and I say, which board game do you like to play? And they go, oh, I'll play any old board game. which means I'll play any board game. It doesn't matter what board game it is. Any old board game will do. Is the food from your country considered nutritious? I'm from the UK, and food in my country isn't really considered to be that nutritious. Okay, next one is craving. This poor lady below me is craving that muffin? Cupcake? I don't really know what it is, but you can tell from her eyes that she really wants to eat it. So a craving is a strong or uncontrolled desire. The pronunciation is craving. First syllable is stressed. After lunch, I have an uncontrollable craving for chocolate. That's not true. I do have an uncontrollable craving for something, but it's not chocolate. You'll find out in a second. So we've got a craving for something. We can also satisfy a craving, and we can crave something. So there's a verb form. Infants crave attention from their parents. All right. Is there any food that you get strong cravings for? Not really. I know a lot of people who will crave chocolate or ice cream. I'm not really like that. I guess I'll usually crave a coffee after lunch. For years, I've got into the habit of having a coffee after lunch. And now, as soon as I finish lunch, I'll start craving craving coffee. And I imagine that I'll probably feel incredibly sleepy if I didn't have one. All right. Do you often crave snacks? So snacks are things like packets of crisps, chocolate bars. A snack can also be fruit as well in the middle of the day. Next word is life expectancy. I really like this little image that I found on the web that talks about the life expectancy in different countries. It's amazing to see that life expectancy of Hong Kong is 84 years old. And in the UK, it's only 81, so quite a big difference. So life expectancy is the length of time that a living thing, usually people, are expected to live for. So at what age they die on average. Life expectancy is the pronunciation. We can say life expectancy is increasing due to advances in healthcare. Now, what can people do to increase their life expectancy? Part 3 question. Here's how I would answer. I think a lot of it comes down to developing healthy habits. Things like exercising regularly, sleeping enough, avoiding too much stress, a balanced diet. These kind of things can help us to live longer. Okay, I want to point out this phrase, comes down to. I think a lot of it comes down to developing healthy habits. So comes down to is like a phrase that we can use to say the most important aspect is, or to summarize the most important aspect I would mention. So we can use comes down to, or boils down to as well. I think a lot of it boils down to developing healthy habits. And I've also got this nice phrase, balanced diet, which I guess is coming up over and over again in this lesson. It's such a useful collocation to use in the IELTS speaking test when we're talking about health and happiness. Right. What are some problems that result from having an aging population? If you get a question like this in the speaking test, you could also get it in the writing test. You can talk about life expectancy and how it's on the rise. Next word, anxiety. An uncomfortable feeling of worry about something that is happening or might happen. Pronunciation, anxiety. It's like anxiety. Not anxiety, You can almost feel a vibration in your throat. Anxiety. Regular testing causes anxiety for many students. Here are some collocations, here are some more collocations, here are even more collocations for you to revise. And here's the adjective form, anxious. Many students feel anxious about starting their careers after graduation. What can trigger feelings of anxiety for teenagers? So the word trigger is a very useful word. It means what can cause feelings of anxiety. A trigger is, you know, on a gun, you've got a little thing that you pull here and it causes the gun to fire a bullet. This is considered the trigger. So we can use trigger as a noun, saying if you pull the trigger, it fires the bullet, but we can also use it as a verb. So to trigger something means to cause something to happen. Well, I guess there are a number of causes. Probably one of the most common is stress related to school life. It's probably not uncommon for young people to feel anxious about upcoming exams, especially if they're important exams like university entrance exams. Teenagers are also going through puberty, which can cause a lot of confusion and hormonal reactions in their body. Their bodies are changing, they can begin to smell different, and all of those changes can make them feel confused and anxious. Okay, so I want to point out this. Well, there are a number of causes, and I say one of the most common is, and then also. So by introducing my answer with there are a number of causes, and then saying one of the most common is, and then another phrase also, I'm showing the examiner that I can logically organize my ideas, and that's going to boost my score for fluency and coherence. Now, I also show the examiner that I've got a lot of topic-specific vocabulary, so words like puberty. Puberty is what happens to children when they reach 11, 12, 13, 14, when their body starts to change and they enter being a teenager and becoming adults. During puberty, they'll have a hormonal reaction, so a change in their body in their hormones. For example, their hormone reaction might be that their sex drive increases, or that they become confused, or that their voice starts to change. Do you think that anxiety is more common nowadays when compared to the past? A very typical part 1 question. Next, aerobic. So often aerobic exercise, and aerobic exercise is exercise that improves the ability, or our body's ability, to use oxygen. So a bit like this class below us, they're doing some sort of HIIT class, some stamina class, maybe dancing and lots of moving, and that's going to be aerobic exercise because it's causing them to breathe a lot and increase their body's ability to use oxygen. So if I were interviewing a student and they said aerobic exercise, instead of just saying exercise, I would note that down as a very good collocation, and that would help me to give them a higher score in the IELTS speaking test. Pronunciation, aerobic, aerobic. So stress is on the ro, aerobic. Students should have more opportunities to do aerobic exercise in school. Okay, so we can talk about aerobic exercise, aerobic health, aerobic ability, aerobic fitness. Now, is it important for young people to have sports lessons at school? For sure. Sports lessons will help them to use up all of their pent-up energy. If they don't do some sport or aerobic exercise, they'll likely be restless and find it more difficult to concentrate in class. For a lot of students, it's also a lot more fun. Being purely focused on studying from 8 till 4 or whenever their class is finished can be incredibly draining. In contrast, having a sports lesson or running around can revitalize them. Okay, lots of vocabulary I want to point out. First is pent-up energy. Okay, so pent-up energy is energy that you're building up, and then you're not able to use. So a lot of children, when they're at school, if they have to do lots and lots of schoolwork, they've got all this pent-up energy. They want to be running around, they want to be chasing their friends, but instead, they're just doing schoolwork, so they have this pent-up energy. Okay, got this nice phrase, aerobic exercise, which is what I'm teaching you in this slide. Restless means that they're agitated. They can't sit still. They're restless. They want to do something. And then we've got this phrase, incredibly draining. So if something is draining, it means it's taking away your energy. In contrast, having a sports lesson or running around can revitalize them, so give them more life. You know the way if you've been working all day, you start to feel a bit kind of drained, a bit sluggish, and then afterwards you go for a walk or drink a coffee or have a good chat and you feel revitalized, you feel alive again. Why is it important to do regular aerobic exercise? Next word is chronic, something which continues for a long time, especially a medical condition. Chronic. Medication to help patients with chronic diseases should be prioritized. Here are some collocations and here is an adverb. Let's move on to the model question. Should cosmetic surgery be prioritized by the government healthcare service? Okay, if you get a question like this in part 3 of the speaking test, it probably means you're at a high level and the examiner is trying to test you, because this would be a difficult question to answer. Here's how I would answer it. I've heard that cosmetic surgery can greatly improve a patient's life, especially when it comes to deformities and abnormalities on someone's body or face. However, I wouldn't say that it should be a priority for the health service. I believe that there are other uses of public funds that could make a larger impact. For example, helping people with chronic or life-threatening diseases. Okay, some vocabulary. Cosmetic surgery. Cosmetic surgery is surgery, so doctors' procedures to kind of change the way that your face looks or change the way that the shape of your body. So a typical cosmetic surgery is a nose reduction. If you think your nose is too big, you can have a nose reduction. That's cosmetic surgery. Some people get cosmetic surgery because they want to look beautiful, and other people want it because they have deformities and abnormalities. So for example, they might have a large scar on their face and they want to change that, so they go to cosmetic surgery. Public funds means the money that the government have, and then we've got this phrase chronic, which means long-lasting illness, and life-threatening illness or life-threatening disease, which means something that could kill you. So I think public funds should be used especially to help people with a chronic or life-threatening disease. Now, do you think it's important for the government to provide public health care? Okay, you can practice that at home. The next word is reliant. A bit like this baby, he, I think. He is reliant on his mother to walk. Okay, so reliant is needing a particular thing to continue, to work correctly, or to succeed. Pronunciation, reliant. Many people are reliant on caffeine and sugar to work long hours. Okay, yeah, I'm sure many of you, when you're studying for your IELTS exam, you're reliant on snacks, on sugar, on caffeine to help you get through all of your studies. However, some of you are going to be totally self-reliant. You only rely on yourself. You don't need the help of friends or family to get what you need done. You're self-reliant. Other people might be heavily reliant on something, which means you are extremely reliant on something. So hopefully you're not heavily reliant on sugar for happiness, because that's going to be awful for your health and awful for your teeth. We can say reliant on or reliant upon something or someone. And we've got a noun form and also a phrasal verb, like rely on someone. Old people rely on having access to good health care. Now, do you think we rely too much on our smartphones? Yes, without a doubt. Our smartphones have become our main source of entertainment, our source of news, and the way that we connect with our friends. Sometimes I feel that it's convenient that we do so much with our phones, like set alarms, pay for things, check the weather. At other times, I think that we've basically become too reliant on our smartphones and feel that it would be better if we didn't have them at all. I especially feel like that when I see groups of people sitting together and eating in a restaurant while looking at their phones instead of talking. I'm sure either you've been that person or you've at least seen it in a restaurant or a cafe, especially with young people. They're sitting together and they're on their phones, they're eating and they're not really chatting together, even though they all arrived together and they are friends. All right, let me show you some aspects of this answer. I start with yes, without a doubt. So I'm certain about my answer. I say yes, without a doubt. Our main source of, so smartphones have become our main source of entertainment, so a good language chunk. I also want to point out this. Sometimes I feel da-da-da, at other times I think da-da-da. This is a good sentence structure that you can use to show a contrast. Sometimes I feel I have a healthy lifestyle. At other times I think that I'm quite lazy and don't do enough for my health. That's the kind of thing you could use it in. To also talk about being too reliant. So reliant is a different form of the word rely. So do you rely too much on our smartphones? And I could say, I think we've become increasingly reliant on our smartphones. So by changing the form of the word, we're showing a more sophisticated level of language use, which of course is going to result in a higher band score. All right, Next one is high blood pressure, a type of medical condition in which blood travels with a greater than normal force. High blood pressure. High blood pressure. Poor diet is considered a prominent factor for high blood pressure. Now, what are some of the effects of stress is a question you could get asked in the speaking test, especially in part 3. Well, high blood pressure for a start. I'd say everyone experiences a certain amount of stress. I think a lot of the problems start when it becomes more than you can bear. When stress becomes unmanageable, it can cause you to lose sleep. Some people will also experience physical symptoms such as headaches and stomach aches. The scary thing about stress is that sometimes people don't realize how much stress they're under. Okay, so I said, well, high blood pressure for a start. Okay, that's a good thing. You can say, well, for a start. That means this is the first cause or the first problem. If I said, what are the problems with being too reliant on your smartphones? Well, your social life might struggle for a start. So this for a start means this is your first topic, the first thing that you're going to mention. I've also got this phrase, bear. It becomes more than you can bear. Now, it doesn't mean bear as in the big animal. If something is more than you can bear, it's more than you can cope with. So you might hear phrases like, I can't bear romantic films. It means I can't cope with romantic films. I don't like them. Or this homework is more than I can bear, which means I can't cope with the amount of homework I've got. So bear. It's a big animal, but there's other uses of the word as well. Okay, I also talk about physical symptoms, so how stress affects your body. And the opposite of physical symptoms could be psychological symptoms. And they would be symptoms that affect your mind. All right, next word is malnourished. So weak and in bad health because of having too little food. Pronunciation, malnourished. Malnourished. There are many people in the world that are severely malnourished. So I like this, severely malnourished as a collocation. We've also got the noun form, malnutrition. Nowadays, there are many people that waste food, while in other countries, there are people who are seriously malnourished. What do you think about that? Whoops, I should have shown you that earlier. There's the question. Okay, I think that that's something to bear in mind. In fact, in the UK, it's common for parents to say that to their children when their children aren't finishing all of their dinner. I think it's something to keep in mind and not necessarily to take for granted. I also think that it's a sad truth about the world, but would have no idea on how to rectify the situation. Okay, so we've also got bear in mind. We just learnt bear in a different context. This phrase, bear in mind, means consider. And it's the same as keep in mind. So I think that's something to bear in mind. Means I think that's something to consider. Or I think that's something to keep in mind. Again, that just means to consider. I also talked about rectifying the situation. So a good collocation, to rectify a situation means to come up with the solution. Right, next phrase, get in shape or to stay in shape. So an idiom here. This means to keep fit or to remain in good physical form, to stay healthy, to keep in good general condition, especially for your body and mind. Stay in shape. She swam every morning for a month to get in shape. Okay, so get or stay in shape. Get in shape means you want to improve your health, and then once you've improved your health, you want to stay in shape, which means you don't want to lapse and then become unhealthy again. So I would ask you, what can people do to get in shape? And you could say, I'd say there are a few things they can do. First of all, they can do regular exercise. A lot of people do aerobic sports like running and cycling. Others do sports like yoga that burn calories and increase their flexibility. People can also go on a diet to get in shape. But to be honest, I prefer the idea of doing exercise rather than reducing how much I eat. But to each their own. All right. There's lots of vocabulary here. Again, I've got this phrase, I'd say that there are a few things they can do, and I say, first of all, da-da-da, also da-da-da. So again, that's going to boost my score for fluency and coherence. I've got this topic-specific vocabulary, aerobic sports. Remember earlier in this lesson we talked about aerobic exercise, things like running, jogging, swimming, that improves your body's ability to use oxygen. A good phrase here, burn calories. So when you're doing exercise, you burn calories, you eat calories. For example, if you eat a banana, you get 100 calories, and then you run for 5 minutes and you burn 100 calories, maybe slightly less. People can also go on a diet. So go on a diet, good collocation, it means to stop eating the food that you want to eat in order to stay healthy. And this phrase at the end, to each their own, is a very interesting idiom that means everybody's different and everybody has their own preferences. So to each their own, it means they can choose whether they want to go on a diet or whether they want to do regular sports. All right. What events in people's lives do they try to get in shape for? So I recently had a friend that had her wedding and she wanted to get in shape for her wedding. So if I got asked this question in part 3 of the speaking test, I'd probably talk about getting in shape for a wedding. The next word is addiction. So the strong desire to need or do something. Addiction. Stress on the addiction. Drug addiction needs to be treated very seriously. Okay, we've got drug addiction, we've got alcohol addiction, we've even got computer game and shopping addiction. We could be addicted or addiction to something. And yes, we've got addicted, an adjective, and we've got the adjective with addiction as well. Right. Some parents worry that their children will become addicted to computer games and therefore don't let them play any computer games. What do you think about that? Well, to begin with, I'd say that that's the parents' choice to do so. And to be honest, there are many reasons to worry about children becoming addicted to such games. You've got to remember that these games have been developed to be as addictive and engaging as possible. Children, especially young children, often have less self-control when it comes to things like regulating how long they sit playing on a games console. It's really up to the parents to set rules about how long their children should be allowed to play with these games. Okay, so I say such games. This is a way of referring back to computer games or console games. I've got have been developed, so that's the passive. Have been developed by game developers to be as addictive as possible. And then we've also got this phrase, when it comes to. So a way to introduce a new idea. And then I say it's really up to the parents. So up to someone is a nice idiomatic expression which means it's their decision. What you do with your body is up to you. It's your decision. Children's school, how people raise their children is up to the parents. So it means it's their decision to make. All right. How can we tell when a habit becomes an addiction? All right. That was the last word, the last phrase in this lesson. Big lesson. All of these vocabulary lessons have been extremely big. I'm actually quite exhausted now by the end of it. But thank you very much if you've reached this point of the lesson, and that's absolutely brilliant. I hope that these are words and phrases that you can use in your IELTS speaking test, your IELTS writing test, and you might even see these words and phrases in the reading and the listening test as well. If you do, great, because you've made it to the very end of the lesson, and hopefully you're going to have a better understanding of all of this advanced vocabulary for this topic of health and happiness. Best of luck with your studies, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.